next project that we're going to be doing is what I'm calling the Quilt As You Go, and it's with the You're My Cup of Tea designs. And so you're going to have the little teapot and the teacup. And the Quilt As You Go, you're going to quilt your blocks, then do the embroidery, and then piece the quilt together. And so this is the completed project. I'm working on the little Easter bench pillow. I'm doing in a tray right now, and I've done the same thing on those blocks. So the technique that we're doing, we're going to put a piece of batting inside our 1/4 inch seam allowance. This has poly mesh stabilizer back here so you can kind of see the batting, but it's within our 1/4 inch seam allowance, so you won't have to go in and trim the batting away or anything like that. And you'll do the quilting on the block, and then you do the embroidery design on top of it, and then you cut the block down and then piece it together. So that's one of my blocks there. Did the same thing on the eggs. It has the batting inside the 1/4 inch seam allowance, the poly mesh stabilizer, and then we trimmed it down to our measurements. I even, the filler blocks, I went ahead and quilted those same way, and then the little pinwheel blocks, quilted those the same way. So when we get back, we will start the project. Okay. We're ready to start our project, and we're going to start with the little teacup block. Now, when you're doing the Quilt As You Go technique, you have to kind of plan ahead, and you're going to kind of, like I would write down some measurements. So like if you were going to do the Broomhilda's Bakery project, your blocks, she always tells you to cut your background block bigger, so it's quite a few inches bigger than what we're going to cut it down to. And so I've done the same thing. So like for your teacup block, I've told you to cut a 6x7 background piece. So that's your first measurement, so it's a little bit oversized. Then it tells you to square your finished block to 8.5 by 6.5. So after we've done the quilting and after we've done the design, you'll cut it down to 8.5 and 6 by 6.5. We will cut our block down for the teacup. We'll cut it down to 4.5 by 5.5. That is allowing for a 1/4 inch seam on either side. So your finished block for this one, for example, would be 8 by 6. For our teacup block, our finished size is going to be 4 inches wide by 5 inches tall. So that's after it's sewn in. The finished size is what we want to cut our batting to, and that is what we're going to create our first block, so that we'll have a placement line for our batting. So that's what we're going to do first, is the finished size. So we're going to go to the Design Center or IQ Designer, and we're going to create that square. So again, we're going to go into Shapes. We're going to choose your square. We're going to size it to that finished size. So I'm going to make this 5 inches tall and then 4 inches wide. And that's going to be this is going to be our placement line for our batting. So then we need to apply the straight stitch setting. Okay, so this is going to be with your pencil tools again. So you go into the piece of paper, choose your double stitch, choose the red color, say OK, touch your bucket, and then touch the line. And then we're going to save this, because you may be doing several blocks in a quilt that are this size. Also, we're going to use this size square to create our quilting design. So we're just going to save us some steps later, so we're going to save it. So on the Stellaires, the Destinies, the Altairs, all of those, you're going to have the little pocket down here that the arrow's pointing into. On the Solaris, it will just say memory down here at the bottom. So you're going to touch that, and we're going to save it into the memory of the machine. Now this is a separate memory from your embroidery designs. This is just the memory for the IQ Designer or the Design Center. So now that we have that set, we're going to push next. We can preview it, or we can change the stitch length if we want to. And remember, the Solarises are going to have fewer steps here. We're going to push set and OK, and this is where it converts it to our embroidery design, but we're not done. We created that placement line for the batting. Now we're going to add the quilting design to that. So we're going to push add. We're going to go back into IQ Designer or Design Center. We're going to get that square that we created back up. So on the Solaris, you'll have a little memory pocket up here at the top. On these machines, it's here, and the little memory pocket and the arrows pointing out of it. I'm going to go into the machine, and there's our first square that we created. So we're just going to bring that up. Now we're going to apply the quilting design to it. So the quilting is going to be filled in. So now we're going to work with the tools around the paintbrush. So we're going to go to the piece of paper. You can touch that third option, touch select. That's going to bring up any of your quilting designs. And for this one, we'll choose the little circles. You can choose whichever one you want. Say OK. It's color red, that'll work. Say OK. Then we need to apply that. So you touch the bucket next to the paintbrush, and then you hit inside the square. Now, I know it's going to put a straight stitch around that quilt design, and I don't want that because that's what we brought up a while ago. So we need to go into your piece of paper by the pencil, and we're going to choose that no sew. We don't want it to stitch anything around that quilt design. Say OK. Remember, touch the bucket, touch that line, and it kind of turns a dotted line. If you touch it again, it does that double knock, so you know that it's accepted your change. We can push next, and we can go ahead and hit preview on these machines. On the Solaris, you'll be able to see it, and see how I still, even though I did that no sew, see how I still have that line around there? Okay, so we're going to hit return, and down here you have the option of turning that outline off, and so I want to turn that outline off. I'm going to set that. If we want to play with the size and the angle of these little bubbles. Now on the Solaris, you're going to have a few more options over here on the side. And your outline on the Solaris, if you've done the upgrade, it is defaulted to the outline being turned off. So you're good there. And I'm going to play with the size just a little bit. I'm going to bump it up just a hair just to see what it looks like. Hit preview, say OK. And I don't like that. For that size block, I think I want a little bit smaller. So I'm going to go back in, go back to sizing, and I may take it down just a little bit. Preview again. Okay, I like that. So I'm going to go with that. So there's my quilt design. I'm going to push set. Okay, this is going to convert it. And now we have the placement line for our batting. And we're going to lay our fabric down also when we get to start sewing. And then we have our quilt design. But we're not done yet. I'm also going to add a cut line. So I'm going to go ahead and create the line that's going to be the size that we're going to cut these blocks down to. So that's going to include your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're going to push add. We're going to go back into the designer. We're going to pull up that same square from your memory of the machine. Because now we can just bump it up just a little bit, make it just a little bit bigger. So we're going to go into size, and we're going to add that 1/4 inch seam. So you have a 1/4 inch on either side, so we need to add a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So we're going to bump it up so it's 4.5 by 4.5 by 5.5. Take that down. I got to figure out which. Okay, so it's 5.5 inches tall, and now 4.5 inches wide. Isn't that fun? Okay, 5.5 by 4.5. Say okay. I want to check it. It should be a straight stitch, but I'm going to check it. So I'm going to say okay. Touch the straight stitch. Choose. I'm going to choose a different color. I'm going to choose blue this time. Say okay. Apply that. Push next. Yes, I'm a straight stitch. hit preview, say OK, and set, and OK. So now we have our 3 steps. Placement line for the batting, quilting, and then our cut line. Now we're actually in the embroidery part of the machine now. These have all been converted to embroidery. Again, if you're going to have different blocks and you may want to use this same size quilt design and everything, let's save that in the memory of the embroidery machine. Now it's going to save that quilt design also. So we're going to say memory and we're going to put it in the embroidery part. But we're not done. We still need to add the design. So we need to add the teacup to it. So we're going to push add. And now we're going to go to our USB stick because that's where our designs are. Maybe. Hang on. Okay. We're going to go into Quilting with Designer. And we're going to get our little teacup. And set that. And see, let's put it right on top. Now, I also want to maybe group all of this together. So if we want to group it together, so if for any reason you want to move it, rotate it, anything like that, if you hit that little icon there, the 3 little squares, that's your select all. So see how it selects everything. We're going to say OK. And then we're going to go into edit, and the little square and circle, that's your group. And so now it's grouped together. So if I were to move it, rotate it, anything like that, everything would be moving together. So now I'm ready to start stitching. So I'm going to hit embroidery. And it's going to stitch off our placement line for our batting first. So we're going to start sewing. And while it's doing that, I'm going to spray the back of my batting with 505 spray. Going to spray my batting, and I'm going to go ahead and spray my fabric that has the SF101 ironed onto it. I'm going to spray that with 505 also. What we're going to do is take our piece of batting, so you can kind of see it, and I stitched that placement line in off-white, so it's kind of hard to see, but I'm going to lay the batting down inside that rectangle. Then I'm going to go ahead and lay the fabric, this is your background fabric, just over that. And see, it's oversized, so it's just make sure you have, plenty of fabric coming off all 4 sides of it, and it's sprayed with 505, so it'll just stick down. Now what it's going to stitch is the quilt design. So we're just going to start it sewing, and when we get done we will come back. Okay, so it finished stitching the quilting, and it did that on top of the batting. And then the machine stopped, and then I just started it again and went ahead and stitched the cut line. So this is our cutting line that's out here. That's our bigger size. It adds the 1/4 inch seam allowance around there. And so now we are to the step for the actual teacup design. So what it's going to stitch first is going to be the placement line for the cup. So we're going to sew that. I'm going to walk you through these first couple of steps on the teacup, just because it's a little bit different the way they did this tack down for the cup. Oh, wait. I stopped it. Okay, at this point, if you did want to add some stabilizer, even though, yes, we do have the polymesh, thank you, polymesh, and the SF101 on the back of the fabric and the batting and everything. If you think that it's going to be kind of a filled-in design and it might pucker and all, and you want to add some more stability, go ahead and do it now. I didn't before this step because I don't want to have to tear stabilizer away from the quilting and away from these straight stitches and everything. So I've just taken a piece of tearaway and sprayed it with 505 spray. I'm just going to stick it onto the back side of my quilt block, and now we'll finish doing the applique. So it's going to do the placement line. Again, we're still doing just the placement line for the little cup. Okay, I want you to see what happens. What it's going to do next is it's going to sew the tack down. So I'm going to lay my fabric piece down on top of that. Okay, but it's going to sew the tack down, and it's also going to sew the T that's in your cup. So here you want to change colors to whatever color you want your T to be. So I'm going to change to brown, and then we'll stitch that off. Okay, so see how it stitched the little T inside the cup at the same time. So now what I'll do is I'll just trim the fabric down, and then it will do the satin stitch around the cup. Then it will do, I believe, the little tea bag, and then the steam coming out of the cup. So I'm just going to finish stitching all of that off, and then we'll be done. Okay, so we're done with the block. So I unhooped it, and now I can just tear the stabilizer away, and see it's just going to tear away from the design. I don't have to tear it away from the quilting or anything. And now we're going to cut it down. And so we have that cut down box that it stitched off. So it should be 4.5 by 5.5. And if it pulls in a little bit, that's okay. So your stitch outline might be pulled in just a hair. That's okay. Cut it down to the size that it needs to be. And then 4.5 by 5.5. Okay, so that one's done. So it has the quilting and the batting inside the seam allowance. So when we piece it together, it won't have that extra bulk in the seam allowance there. So we're going to keep on, and we're going to do the teapot next. Okay, now we're ready to do the block with the teapot. So I had you cut that background 7 by 7, so it's oversized. We're going to cut it down to 5.5 by 5.5. That's going to include our 1/4 inch seam allowance, and so finished it's going to be 5 by 5. So we need to make our first placement line for our batting the 5 by 5. So we're going to go into the IQ Designer, go get our shape, the square, go ahead and size it, and we're going to make it 5 by 5. I need to apply the straight stitch, so we're going to go to the piece of paper around your pencil, choose the double stitch, and this time instead of choosing a red color, I'm going to choose like green because I want it to be a different color than what we did on the teacup box, so that I can tell which is which. And so we've got to apply that setting, so you touch the bucket next to the pencil, touch the line, and it turns green. Then I'm going to save that in the memory pocket of the machine. Alright, now I'm going to hit next, preview, we're going to set it, and there's our placement line for the batting. Now we need to add the quilt design, so we're going to touch add, go back to the IQ Designer. We're going to pull up the square from our memory. Remember, the Solaris's memory is up there where you pull it from. We're going to get our green box. See, now I can tell which is which, so that's our green box for the teapot. Alright, and we're going to apply the quilt design to it. So I'm going to go into the piece of paper that's around the paintbrush, go get whichever quilt design we want. And then we need to apply that into our square. And this kind of freaked me out because the square's gone. But if you hit the paintbrush and then just touch in the middle of the square, there it is. Now I want to make sure, like if I go to next and I hit preview, see how it still has that straight stitch line around there that's green? Okay, we need to get rid of that. So I'm going to hit return and return again. I'm going to remember we're going to apply that no-sew to that outline. So I'm going to the piece of paper that's by the pencil, hit the no-sew, say OK, touch the bucket next to the pencil, and then touch the line. I'm going to hit next. Now remember, we still have to turn off that outline. So we're going to turn that off also. If you want to play with the size and the angle and everything, you can. I'm just going to leave it the way it is. Hit preview and OK. Remember the Solaris, you'll be able to see it. And now we have our quilt design. Now I'm going to set that. Say OK. Now we have the placement line for the batting, our quilt design, and now we're going to add our cut line, which needs to be 5.5 by 5.5. So we're going to push add, go back to the designer, go pull our square from the memory pocket again. We're going to size it up just a little bit, make it 5.5 by 5.5. Say OK. I'm going to hit next, and it's still the straight stitch, so we're good. Hit preview and OK. And set and OK. So now here, if I was doing a quilt and I was going to have another block again that was going to be this same size and I wanted to use this same quilt design, I could group all this together and save it in the memory of the machine. So I'm going to touch the square, circle, and triangle down there, do the pink options, and that's your select all. Say OK. Go to edit, your square and circle, that's your group. So it's grouped together now. I'm going to save it in the memory of the machine, but I still need to add our teapot. So now I'm going to add, and remember this is on our USB stick. Go into the Quilting with Designer and go get our teapot and push set, and that puts it right in the center. I'm going to start the embroidery. Was this too big for my 5x? Yep. And I've got to go hoop up a larger hoop. I tried doing this in the 5x7. I did the teacup in the 5x7. This one I'm going to have to go to the bigger hoop. So we'll be back. Okay, so I grabbed a 6x10 hoop from one of the other machines. So this is kind of a good example why some of these other hoops come in handy. So it'll fit in the 6x10. I didn't have to go up to the 9.5 by 9.5 hoop. And my narrower stabilizer still fit in this hoop. So now we're ready to stitch. So it's going to sew the placement line first. So while that's stitching, I'm going to spray the back of my batting and the back of my background fabric that has the SF101 ironed onto it. And if you wanted to, like here, because it's going to do that double stitch, you know, I can stop it. I don't have to go around both of them. So I'm going to stop it. I'm going to cut the thread. Then place my, you can barely see that line, but I can see it. Place my batting down inside that square. And then place my fabric centered over it. Make sure you have plenty of fabric on all four sides. And then once I come back here to the machine, since I stopped it, I need to forward through the rest of that. So I'm just going to go into the needle with the minus and plus, go down to the quilting, and now start stitching the quilting. And we'll come back when that's done. Okay, so it's done the quilting, and then I went ahead and stitched the cut down line, and so it's going to start doing the applique teapot next. So I'm going to take my piece of tearaway, and I sprayed it with 505. I'm going to stick that on the back, and then I'm just going to finish the teapot. This one doesn't have any weird things, so I'm just going to keep on going. It'll do the placement line for the teapot, the tack down, and then do the satin stitch, and then the little handles and everything. So we will come back when we're done. Okay, this is doing something weird. It did the placement line for my pot, and then I laid my fabric down and it did a tack down, but it's automatically going into doing the satin stitch. So I've got to stop the machine, so make sure y'all watch this. So before it starts doing the satin stitch, they must have digitized this for pre-cut pieces. So here I stopped the machine after it did the tack down, and then I'm going to trim my fabric, and then I'll just start it again and it'll do the satin stitch. Then we'll come back. Okay, and now we're ready to cut it out. And so this should be the 5.5 by 5.5. We have our cut lines, but just make sure, double check it with your ruler. 5.5 by 5.5. Oh, and tear your stabilizer away. Okay, it's gonna be a whole lot easier to tear that away. Now, okay, now I finish cutting it. And next we're going to do the blocks with the words. And I'm hoping, I think I can get both of these stitched off in one hooping. So I've hooped up the bigger hoop with the poly mesh. Okay, so for the words, I had you cut 2 background pieces 4 by 10, iron the SF101 onto the back of them, and then 2 pieces of batting 2 by 9. So the blocks finished are going to be 2 inches by 9 inches. So one more time, we're going to go into the IQ Designer. We're going to go get our shape, and then we're going to size it to the 2 by 9. So I'm going to go ahead and shrink it down, make it 2 inches widthwise. And then, whoops, 9 inches tall. And then we've got to apply the straight stitch, so the piece of paper by the pencil. Choose your double stitch. Let's choose purple. Say OK. Touch the bucket next to the pencil. Touch the line. Save that in the memory. Push next and preview and set and OK. And now we need to add the quilting. Back to IQ. Pull that rectangle from the memory. Apply the quilt design. So we're going around the paintbrush. And this one I'm going to do the stipple in. Remember, touch the bucket next to the paintbrush. Touch the rectangle. We need to go apply the no-sew. So the piece of paper around the pencil. No-sew. Touch the bucket. Okay, and I'm going to do the same quilt design on both of my wording backgrounds. So I'm going to push next, And now this, I do want that stipple up close to the size that I made it. This is kind of a border. And so I always take that down to 0 because I want it right up next to the size rectangle that I made. And then I want to go look at it and see if I need to play with the size of the stipple. I'm going to increase the size just a little bit of the stipple itself. So that is this right here. And remember, the Solar Shear options are over here on the side. And I'll make it just a little bit bigger. And then hit preview. And okay. Then set. Okay. Now I need to add the cut line. So this is going to be 2.5 by 9.5. Back to the designer. Pull that shape from the memory. Size it up just a little bit. 2.5 by 9.5. Here we go. Then next, preview. Okay. Set. And okay. Okay, so I've got my 3 steps. I need to group I need to group these together. So select all, edit, group those together, and then I'm going to save this in the memory of the machine so I can just bring this back up and add my other set of words, because remember you have, what does it say? You're my cup of tea. So we're going to put you're my in this one, and then we'll bring it back up and do cup of tea. So I'm going to save that in the memory of the machine, and then add the you're my, and that's on your USB stick. You're my. Okay, I need to rotate it. Now I want to group all of that together because I need to move this over because I'm going to stitch them off in both designs in this one hoop. So I need to, remember, select all, then group those 2 together, and then I can move them over here. Now I just need to add, and I'm going to add what I already have created. So this is in the memory of the machine. I'm not going back to the IQ Designer. I'm not going to the USB stick because this is the quilting that I added, and I saved it in the memory of the machine. And there it is. And then I'm going to add my cup of tea. That's off your USB stick. To rotate it. Now I need to group. Now, okay, if I do, okay, we're going to go in here, but if I do select all, that's going to select these 2. Okay, I just want to select these 2, the quilting design and then the cup of tea. So that's what these are right here. I have the cup of tea is selected right now because that's the last thing that I brought in. So I'm going to push set. Then I'm going to use the select arrows. I'm going to go back 1, and it put a red line around this set of quilt designs, and then I'm going to set those. So now I have just those 2 selected. I don't want to do select all because it would select this one. I just have those 2 selected. Say OK, group those together, and now I can move them over here. I can get a hold of that one and move them over. So that's where that select tool and your grouping tool come in handy. So now we're ready to stitch these off. So hit embroidery and start stitching off the first placement line for my batting. This is going to be the same process. I'm going to, while it stitches the placement line, I'm going to spray the batting and my fabric, lay those down. It'll do the quilting, and then it'll do the embroidery design. So once we're done doing all this, we'll come back. Okay, now what you're going to do when you put it together, once you have all your blocks completed and they're quilted and everything and cut out, then you're just going to sewing machine piece them together. So you'll sew these together and then you'll sew those on top and on bottom. Now on this one, I did not quilt the borders here. Okay, so what I did is I just took my border pieces and I sprayed my batting with 505 spray, and then I centered them on the border like that, and I still have that seam allowance there. But on this one that I'm doing, I think I want to quilt these. Okay, so we're going to, these are pre-cut because I told you to go ahead and cut these. So I had you cut the borders. 2 of them are 3 by 9.5 inches, and then 2 of them are 3 by 14 inches. So the finished size is going to be 2.5 by 9 and 2.5 by 13.5. Okay, because this is your cut size. So the sewn in size, so we're going to do this one first. So 2.5 by 9. So we're going to do this just a little bit different because these are pre-cut. The borders are pre-cut already to the size I told you they needed to be. So we're going to go into the IQ Designer. We're going to go get our shape and size it for the batting. So this needs to be the finished size. So I said 2.5 wide by 9. I keep moving that one by 9. Yep, 9. So this is going to be for the 2 side borders. So this is going to be our batting placement line. And we're going to apply that double stitch, and this time let's use orange. And touch the bucket, touch the line, save that in the memory, push next, preview, set, okay. Now what I need to add is a placement line for my piece, my border piece, because I had you cut this the size it needed to be to attach to your blocks, so we need to create a placement line for that. So that's going to be, we can bring up our square or our rectangle and then just bump it up that 1/2 inch. So this needs to be the 3 inches wide by 9.5. And it's going to be a straight stitch again because we pulled it from the memory. Okay, so we have our placement line for the batting, our placement line for the piece of fabric. Now we need to add the quilting. So we'll add back to the designer. Whoops. We're going to pull up that original rectangle, or the one that we did for the border, and then apply the quilting inside it. So back to the paintbrush, touch the piece of paper. What quilting do I want to do on this one? This one, I want to do one that's kind of open, maybe, no, it's kind of leafy since we're doing kind of fall. That one's leafy. There we go. Say okay. Say okay. Touch the bucket next to the paintbrush. Apply that. Remember the no sew next to your pencil. Bucket. Touch the line. Next, I'm going to go ahead and hit preview. See what I've got. Okay. Hit return. I'm going to turn that outline off. Remember that. And I'm going to enlarge this design just a little bit because I don't want a whole lot of quilting in this because it is pre-cut and I don't want it to draw in a lot. So I'm going to size it up some. That'll work. Okay, set. Okay. Now I'm going to group all of this together. I want all of these. Select all. Go to edit. Group it. And now I can move that over, and I need 2 of them because I have 2 borders. So it's not going to let me, with them grouped together, it's not going to let me duplicate. So what I'm going to do is save that in the memory of the machine. Just touch add, go back to the memory of the machine, get that quilt design there, and set it. And now I have 2. And then you'll just hoop up your poly mesh, stitch off the placement line for your batting, lay it down, stitch off the placement line for your border, lay it down, spray them with 505 spray, and then stitch off the quilting. And then just repeat that process for your other borders. Okay, now you're ready to put the whole thing together. So you're just going to attach your borders, do the 2 side borders first, and then the top and the bottom. And then you can back it if you just want to lay your backing behind there and then do the quilting where you stitch in the ditch and then bind it. Or you can just lay your backing piece on top, right sides together, sew around 1/4 inch, leave an opening, and turn it right side out, and then quilt it to attach the backing by stitching in the ditch. So you can see on the back side, kind of zoom in, how we just stitched in the ditch to hold your backing piece to it. And then you're complete. And so that project's done, and the next project will be the what I'm calling traditional quilting, where you will quilt it after the whole thing is put together. So that video will come out probably next week sometime. Thanks.